Calvin blocked the chair, his tone flat as stone. "Mom, you don't belong here." Miles added softly, "Mom, this meeting is for heirs only." The red folder slipped. Papers scattered. They kept talking. "Without me. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from." They stood like guards at a theater door. Two of them, my sons. Calvin wore his blue suit. The one that meant business. Miles had grease under his nails. Always did. Always would. Calvin spoke first. "You're not listed as a party," he said. His voice crisp. Clean. Sure of itself. Miles shifted beside him. "This meeting is for stakeholders only." His words softer. Gentler. That hurt more. I held my tote bag tighter. Inside was the red folder. Rubber banded twice. I hadn't come to perform. I had come to prove. My name is Edith Navarro. 73 years old. Retired registered nurse. Widow for 12 years now. Some days it feels like yesterday. Some days like forever. I spent 40 years in hospitals. Night shifts mostly. Watching over people when they're most fragile. When they need someone steady. Someone who doesn't panic when monitors beep. When breathing stops. When families fall apart. You learn things in that work. How to stay calm when others lose control. How to make hard decisions quickly. How to tell the difference between helping and enabling. Between love and possession. My brother Jorge built Lighthouse Press from nothing. Second-hand shelves and stubborn dreams. For 21 months I fed him soup during chemo. Drove him to treatments. Typed when his hands shook too much to hold a pen. We signed papers together those last months. Co-trustees of the company trust. He made me promise to keep it going. Keep publishing weird little books for weird readers. Keep paying editors on time. Keep the lights on for people who need them. That's why I was here. Not as a grieving sister. Not as a confused old woman. As a trustee. With documents. With authority. With work to do. The conference room glowed with winter light. Frost covered the windows. A nameplate read Harriet Feldman-esque. She was handling the dissolution of Lighthouse Press. Jorge's small publishing house. Built from dreams and determination. A receptionist appeared. "Miss Feldman will see you now," she said. Calvin raised his palm. "My mother isn't a stakeholder. Easy as ordering lunch. We'll catch her up later." I stepped past them both. Didn't touch their sleeves. Didn't look back. "You can catch up if you like. I'm on time." Harriet rose when I entered. Gray hair neat. Eyes bright. The kind of brightness that comes from reading people. "For a living." "Edith," she said, "do you have the executed addendum?" I set the red folder on her desk. Pulled off the rubber bands. Paper sighed. He asked me to bring the originals. Silence filled the room. I didn't feel small. I felt steady. Like a nurse at 3 in the morning. Familiar with monitors. Unshaken by alarms. I wasn't there to win an argument. I was there to keep a promise. Once our house smelled like rubbing alcohol. And cinnamon toast. I was Edith Navarro, RN. Working night shifts. Making daytime miracles. Shoelaces tied. Fevers sponged. Lunches packed. Jorge was my brother. Ink-stained and joyful. He talked about fonts the way other men talked about fishing. Calvin learned early that charm opened doors. More than keys ever could. Miles found engines. Never looked back. Victor died 12 years ago. My husband. Aneurysm. Sudden as lightning. I kept moving. You learn to. Grief runs on its own timetable. Life insists on chores. Calvin handled the funeral logistics. Managerial grace. A spare shoulder squeeze. Miles carried every folding chair to the shed. Cried into his shirt. When he thought I wasn't looking. Jorge kept showing up with books. I didn't have room for them. You need company, he'd say. Stacking poetry on my microwave. Later, when the scans went bad, he came to live with me. Guest room painted soft green. From when my boys were small. I pushed his chemo pump on wheels. Like a reluctant suitcase. He taught me to repair squeaks. I taught him to rest without apologizing. Between appointments he made lists. Authors to pay. Interns to thank. A revived trust for the press. With me as co-trustee. Successor if he didn't make it. I'm not leaving you a mess, he said one night. Voice thin. Eyes clear. I'm leaving you a map. My boys knew he was sick. They didn't know about the map. After the funeral, Calvin began helping. Called vendors. Introduced himself as family. Floated the word executor. Like a balloon he wanted to tie to my wrist. Miles came by to fix things. Asked if the building was worth anything these days. I baked empanadas. Changed the subject. Silence is a language. People hear what they want in its grammar. Harriet read the addendum slowly. Like nurses read EKG strips. For the truth hiding in patterns. Dated 8 months before Jorge's death, she said. Reinstates the Lighthouse Trust. Appoints you as co-trustee and sole successor. Assignment of the building title to the trust. He kept this quiet. He knew how Calvin negotiates. Smile first. Corner later. You'll need protections, Harriet said. Control of the operating account. New locks wouldn't hurt. I have someone in mind, I said. Nora Chen, my cousin's granddaughter, 24 years old, works nights at the library. She brought Jorge newspaper clippings. Ginger tea. Never asked for discounts. I want to start a scholarship. Editorial apprenticeships. Under a living trust. With Nora as trustee when I'm gone. Harriet smiled. Like sunlight hitting file cabinets. We'll draft 2 things. A trustee resolution for immediate control. And your will with a no contest clause. If Calvin or Miles challenges, they forfeit their small bequests. Small, I echoed. Something unclenched inside me. I wasn't shutting them out of love. I was closing a door they kept trying to pry with borrowed crowbars. By afternoon the bank knew my name. Lighthouse's keys hung heavier in my purse. I walked through the silent press room. Palms grazing cold machine backs. Whispered to the rafters. I've got it, brother. I've got it. The old press didn't answer. But the quiet changed shape. Less like an empty stage. More like a room waiting for rehearsal. I stood where I belonged. Finally, the map was in my hands. The promise would be kept. Jorge always said I was stronger than I knew. Now I was strong enough to know it. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Once our house smelled different. Rubbing alcohol and cinnamon toast. Mixed together like hope and duty. I was Edith Navarro then. RN on my badge. Working nights. Making miracles in daylight hours. Shoelaces tied before school. Fevers cooled with damp cloths. Lunches packed with love notes inside. Jorge lived 3 blocks away. Ink under his fingernails. Joy in his voice. He talked about fonts the way fishermen talked about rivers. Like they held secrets. Like they mattered more than money. Calvin was my firstborn. Golden boy. Learned early that smiles opened doors. Faster than any key could. Charm was his currency. He spent it freely. Miles found engines young. Never looked back. Grease became part of him. under his nails, in the creases of his palms. He spoke their language, pistons and belts and carburetors. 2 sons, 2 different ways of moving through the world. Victor was my anchor then. Steady as sunrise, predictable as coffee at 6. We had routines, small ones, sacred ones, Saturday pancakes, Sunday crosswords, evening news together on the couch. Then the aneurysm came, like lightning on a clear day. No warning, no goodbye, just Victor on the kitchen floor. Coffee mug shattered beside him. 12 years ago now. Still feels like yesterday. Still feels like forever. I kept moving after. You learn to. Grief doesn't ask permission. Life doesn't wait for healing. Dishes still need washing. Bills still need paying. Sons still need mothering. Calvin handled the funeral arrangements. All business. Efficient grace under pressure. He squeezed my shoulder twice. Dry-eyed and managing. That was Calvin. Always managing. Miles carried every chair from the service. Stacked them in our shed. Cried into his work shirt. When he thought nobody was watching. That was Miles. Feeling everything. Showing nothing. Jorge kept visiting after. Arms full of books. You need company, he'd tell me. Stacking poetry collections on my microwave. Philosophy texts by my coffee maker. Words everywhere. Like he was building walls against silence. His apartment grew too small. Books in every room. Manuscripts on the kitchen table. Galley proofs beside the bathroom sink. Lighthouse Press was expanding. Becoming something bigger than Jorge expected. 5 years after Victor died, Jorge got sick. Started with a cough. Became something else. Something with sharp edges. Long medical names. Treatment schedules that ruled our days. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. The doctor's voice was gentle. His eyes weren't. They knew statistics. They knew outcomes. They knew Jorge was running out of time. Jorge moved into my guest room. The one painted soft green. From when the boys were small. When they needed nightlights. When monsters lived under beds. I became his caretaker then. Pushed his chemo pump on silent wheels. Like a reluctant pet following us everywhere. 2 treatments. 2 grocery stores. To the press on good days. He taught me things during those months. How to fix the squeaky front door. Which authors needed gentle handling. Which manuscripts showed promise. How to read profit and loss statements. I taught him things too. How to rest without apologizing. How to accept help gracefully. How to let someone love you. When you're dying. Between treatments he made lists. Always lists. Authors to pay first. Interns to keep happy. Bills in order of importance. A trust fund for the press. With me named as successor. I'm not leaving you a mess, he told me one winter evening. Voice paper thin. Eyes still bright. I'm leaving you a map. His composition books filled with plans. Sketches of book covers. Notes about keeping the building. About paying interns fairly. About never selling unless the roof fell in. The boys visited during his illness. Calvin brought flowers. Asked practical questions. Talked about property values. Market conditions. Exit strategies. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. Miles brought soup. Fixed whatever was broken. Asked about Jorge's comfort. About pain levels. About whether we needed anything. Anything at all. Different sons. Different ways of caring. Both trying. Neither understanding. Jorge died on a Thursday morning. February wind rattling windows. I was holding his hand. He squeezed once. Then nothing. Just silence where breathing used to be. The funeral was small, warm despite the cold. People Jorge had helped over the years. Authors he'd published. Students he'd mentored. Books on every pew instead of flowers. That was Jorge's request. Words instead of petals. After the service, Calvin started helping. That's what he called it. Helping. He contacted vendors, introduced himself as family, used the word executor like it was already decided. Miles came by more often. To fix things that weren't broken. To ask careful questions about property values. About what would happen to the building. About whether I needed assistance with decisions. I made empanadas those evenings. Changed subjects when talk turned to business. Fed them like they were still my small boys. Hungry after school. Needing comfort food and quiet spaces. But I listened too. Heard them planning around me. Over me. Without me. Silence became my language then. Let them hear what they wanted. Let them make assumptions. Let them think grief had made me smaller. Weaker. More manageable. They were wrong about that. Grief had made me something else. Something harder. Something that knew the difference between love and possession. Between helping and taking. Jorge's map was clear. Written in his careful handwriting. Tucked inside composition books. Filed with lawyers. Recorded with the county. Legal and binding and mine. I wasn't smaller after his death. I was sharper. Like a knife that had found its proper edge. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Harriet read the addendum slowly. Like good nurses read EKG strips. Looking for truth hiding in patterns. Dated 8 months before Jorge's death, she murmured. Her finger traced the signature line. Reinstates the Lighthouse Trust. Appoints you as co-trustee and sole successor. Explicit instruction that posthumous changes require your signature. She turned the page. Paper whispered against paper. And here. Assignment of the building title to the trust. He kept this quiet. I nodded. He knew how Calvin negotiates. Smile first. Corner later. Harriet looked up. Gray eyes sharp as winter light. You'll need protections. Control of the operating account. A spendthrift clause for distributions you choose to make. Titles recorded with the county. She paused. New locks for the loading bay wouldn't hurt either. I surprised myself then. Spoke words I hadn't planned. I have a cousin's granddaughter. Nora Chen. 24 years old. Night desk at the public library. She brought Jorge newspaper clippings. Ginger tea. Never once asked for discounts. Harriet waited. Patient as stone. I'd like to start a scholarship. In Jorge's name. Editorial apprenticeships. Tuition stipends. Under a living trust. With Nora as trustee when I'm gone. Harriet's smile arrived like sunlight hitting glass. Then we'll draft 2 things. A trustee resolution for immediate control. And your own will with a no contest clause. She leaned forward. If Calvin or Miles challenges, they forfeit whatever small bequests you've planned. Small, I echoed. Something unclenched inside my chest. I wasn't shutting them out of love. I was closing a door they kept trying to pry. With borrowed crowbars. By afternoon my name stood alone on the operating account. Lighthouse's key ring jingled heavier in my purse. Authority has weight. Responsibility has sound. I drove to the press building. Parked in Jorge's old spot. Under the oak tree he'd refused to cut down. Even when acorns dented car hoods every fall. The front door still squeaked. Jorge had shown me how to fix it. Oil the hinges. Adjust the strike plate. Simple maintenance he'd neglected for years. too busy with books to notice doors. Inside, afternoon light slanted through dusty windows. Golden bars across empty desks. The old Heidelberg press sat silent, massive as a sleeping elephant. Jorge used to pat its side, like greeting an old friend. I walked through the spaces slowly, palms grazing cold machine backs, breathing in scents of ink and paper, of dreams printed on cheap stock, of stories nobody else would tell. The office held Jorge's coffee mug, still stained brown inside, a half-finished crossword on his desk, pen beside it, like he'd just stepped out for lunch. His composition notebooks lined one shelf. 23 of them, black and white marbled covers, filled with his careful handwriting. Plans and sketches, author notes, financial projections, the architecture of his dreams. I opened one at random, found a paragraph about intern wages, about paying fairly even when cash ran thin, about never forgetting that young writers needed food, not just encouragement. Another page held building maintenance notes, roof repairs scheduled, heating system upgrades planned, foundation work delayed but necessary. Jorge thinking years ahead, decades ahead, beyond his own short timeline. On the last page he'd written something different. Personal, not business. Edith understands the heartbeat of this place. Lighthouse should be hers to steer. If I can't, my vision blurred, not from tears, from recognition. He'd seen something in me. Something I was just learning to see myself. I whispered to the silent press room then. Words I needed to say. Words he needed to hear. I've got it, brother. I've got it. The old machines didn't answer. But the quiet changed shape. Less like abandonment, more like anticipation, a stage waiting for its next performance. I locked up carefully. Every door, every window. Security had become personal now. This wasn't just Jorge's legacy anymore. It was mine to protect, mine to nurture, mine to pass forward. The drive home took me past Calvin's neighborhood. Large houses, manicured lawns, success displayed like jewelry. I didn't slow down, didn't look twice. That world belonged to people who confused price with value. At home I made soup. Vegetable barley, Jorge's favorite. Ate it while reading through legal documents. Trustee responsibilities, financial authorities, the machinery of inheritance explained in careful lawyer language. Later I called the locksmith. Scheduled new locks for tomorrow. Changed the alarm codes. Updated bank signature cards. Small actions, large consequences. Evening brought phone calls. Calvin first. Voice tight with controlled frustration. He'd heard about the bank account changes. About my meeting with Harriet. About documents he hadn't seen. We need to discuss this, he said. As a family. I told him the family had been discussing it. For months. Around kitchen tables. Over coffee. In quiet conversations when they thought I wasn't listening. The family had decided, without asking me. Now I was deciding, without asking them. Miles called later, voice softer, more uncertain. He'd talked to Calvin, heard about legal papers, about trusts and bank accounts, about locks being changed. Mom, he said, are you angry at us? I considered the question, felt around its edges, tested its weight. No, I told him finally. I'm done being small. Different thing entirely. The house settled around me as evening deepened. Familiar creaks and sighs. Sounds of wood and plaster. Of a life built slowly. Room by room. Year by year. I wasn't angry at my sons. Anger burns hot. Burns out. What I felt was cooler. more durable. The quiet determination of someone who'd found her proper place. Jorge's map was clear now. Written in legal documents. Recorded in county files. Protected by no contest clauses. But more than that. Written in my understanding. My acceptance of who I'd become. Not just a widow. Not just a mother. Not just someone who cleaned up other people's messes. A woman with keys. With authority. With work to do. And time enough to do it right. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Calvin arrived at 8:03 the next morning. I know because I was watching. Coffee in hand. Curtain pulled back just enough. He carried flowers, wrapped in paper that matched his tie. Yellow roses. My least favorite. He'd never bothered to learn that. The doorbell rang twice. Sharp. Insistent. Like Calvin himself. I opened the door slowly. Let him see me deciding. Let him wait in the threshold. Between invitation and refusal. "Mom," he said, stepping into my living room uninvited. Like he owned the space. Like he'd never stopped living here. He kissed my cheek. Air kiss. No contact. Performance without warmth. "We should align," he continued. Voice smooth as sales pitch. Like he'd practiced the words. Rehearsed the tone. On my coffee table I'd set out nothing. No cookies. No tea service. No refreshments. I'd learned the hard way. Hospitality becomes negotiation. Sugar turns into leverage. He sat anyway. Made himself comfortable. Legs crossed. Posture confident. Like the living room was his office now. "There's confusion about Lighthouse," he began. "Vendors think I'm point of contact. I can be. I'm good at this." His hands moved while he talked. Gesturing. Shaping air into arguments. Into opportunities. "You don't need the stress," he added. Almost gentle. Almost caring. Almost convincing. "I have the documents," I said simply. Documents change. His smile never wavered. "That's what lawyers are for." But mine had already filed what mattered. County clerk's stamp. Older than his last clever plan. Legal and binding. Beyond his reach. Still I let him talk. Listened to his vision. Synergy. Expansion. Market positioning. Resale value. All the words that turn dreams into spreadsheets. He painted pictures with PowerPoint language. Growth trajectories. Strategic partnerships. Exit strategies. Everything Jorge had refused to consider. "Legacy," he said finally. Like it was a coupon. Like it had an expiration date. "Calvin," I said at last. Let the silence stretch. Let him lean forward. Let him think I was softening. "I was with your uncle when he signed the trust." Present tense. Active voice. No ambiguity. "I want Lighthouse to keep paying editors on time. Publishing weird little books. Books that never make anyone rich. That's the legacy." His smile cooled by degrees. Like ice forming on windows. "Mom," he said, "we can't freeze assets based on nostalgia. We can secure assets based on law." His eyes sharpened then. Predator recognizing resistance. "You'd cut out your own son?" The question hung between us. Heavy as smoke. Sharp as accusation. "I will stop confusing access with love." The words came out calm. Final. Like a diagnosis delivered with professional distance. No apology. No explanation. Just fact. For a moment he seemed to search my face. Looking for the mother who would withdraw the sentence. Replace it with something softer. Something more manageable. When he didn't find her, something shifted. The salesman mask slipped. Underneath was someone younger. Angrier. More familiar. The boy who'd thrown tantrums in grocery stores. Who'd sulked when denied? Who'd learned charm because force didn't work? On me. He placed the flowers carefully on my table. Like a receipt for a purchase not made. Like evidence of effort unappreciated. I'll be in touch, he said. Standing smoothly. Adjusting his tie. Rebuilding the professional facade. The door closed behind him with a soft click. No slam. No drama. Calvin didn't do obvious anger. Too crude. Too revealing. I carried the flowers to the kitchen sink. Trimmed the stems anyway. Arranged them in a mason jar. Love doesn't disappear when you choose sense. It just stops signing contracts it didn't read. The roses sat on my counter. Bright against white tile. Beautiful and wrong. Like Calvin's vision of help. Well-intentioned. Completely missing the point. I made more coffee. Sat at the kitchen table. Looked out at the backyard where Victor had planted tomatoes. Where the boys had played catch. Where life used to be simpler. Before everyone wanted something. The phone rang twice that morning. Calvin's number. I let it ring. Then ring again. Some conversations require cool-down periods. Space for better judgment. Afternoon brought a text message. His first attempt at digital communication. We need to talk. Soon. I deleted it without responding. Talk required two people willing to listen. Calvin specialized in monologues. In presentations. In closing deals. But I wasn't for sale. Neither was Lighthouse. Neither was Jorge's dream of weird little books. Finding their weird little audiences. Making the world slightly stranger. Slightly better. Evening brought another visitor. Miles this time. Work boots respectful on the mat. Hands empty. No flowers. No agenda visible from the doorway. You cooking? He asked. Like it was 10 years ago. Like he'd dropped in after a late shift. Greasy and tired and hungry as winter. I can, I said. Meaning would. Meaning welcome. Meaning sit. I warmed soup. Reheated rice. Put out pickled onions he'd loved since childhood. We ate without negotiation. Without discussion of business. Like family used to do. When dishes were rinsed and counters wiped clean, he slid an envelope across the table. Brown manila. His name written in careful block letters. Numbers, he said quietly. Everything you spotted me since Dad died. I wrote it out. Inside was a ledger. Neat columns in pencil. Tires. Rent. Fines. A loan for the garage when his partner vanished. Even $30 I'd tucked under his phone case. The day his starter died. You kept track, I said. Not accusation. Recognition. Surprise. I meant to make it right. His voice rough. I got good at meaning. He swallowed hard. Adam's apple working. Calvin says Lighthouse is a corporate asset. Says you're being sentimental. He wants me on emails. Wants me to sign something. Pause. Breath. Decision. I haven't. Don't, I said gently. You don't need to be brave like a lawyer. Just be clear. He nodded. Eyes bright with unshed tears. I can do clear. I slid the ledger back across the table. Keep this. Pay when you can. Or pay forward to someone who needs a starter. Someone who can't afford one. Either counts. He stared at me. Like seeing a stranger. You're not mad? I'm done, I said. Different thing entirely. When he left, the quiet in the house was kind. Like a chair finally adjusted to your back. I stood at the sink. Hands in warm soapy water. Let myself hope for a family that didn't need me to disappear. To love me. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The envelope arrived thick. Heavy stock paper. Law firm logo embossed like a threat wearing cologne. I read it at the same table where I'd once sorted permission slips. Field trip money. Lunch receipts. The archaeology of motherhood. Now buried under legal language. Pending action. Fiduciary breach. Request to freeze transfer. Amicable resolution preferred. They wanted a meeting to align expectations. Calvin's phrase. Calvin's strategy. Dress up demands as discussions. Make taking sound like giving. My coffee grew cold while I read. Twice. 3 times. Looking for loopholes. Finding none. Just polite threats in paragraph form. Courtesy wrapped around brass knuckles. I called Harriet. Second ring answered. Always efficient. Never rushed. Posturing, she said when I'd read the letter aloud. They'll file something to rattle you. We'll file back. Standard procedure. Will it hold anything up? I asked. Maybe. Short delays. But the trust is solid. Title recorded. Jorge's board notes and emails sing the same tune. Everything matches the addendum. Relief tasted like pennies. Metallic. Sharp. I wasn't losing Jorge's dream. Not to legal tricks. Not to family pressure. Not to sons who saw dollar signs where he'd seen destiny. After hanging up, I went to the spare room. The one still painted soft green. From when my boys needed nightlights. When monsters lived under beds. Not in boardrooms. On the high shelf sat Jorge's composition books. 23 of them. Black and white marbled covers. He'd kept them like talismans. Even when computers were easier. Even when his hands shook. I opened them and found him on every page. Dates and lists. Little sketches of book jackets. Margin notes about authors who needed encouragement. Who deserved second chances. Who wrote stories nobody else would publish. One entire paragraph about how the press should always pay interns. Never sell the building unless the roof fell in. Keep publishing weird books. For weird people. Who needed to know they weren't alone. I copied what mattered. Made a binder with tabs. Labeled it the way I'd labeled med carts for years. Obvious. Unmissable. Calm. Evidence organized by date. By topic. By relevance to Jorge's intentions. His vision of lighthouse continuing. Long after he was gone. Long after I was gone. That night the phone rang late. I answered because I'm old enough to know some calls don't wait. Ma, Miles said, voice tight. He served you, didn't he? He did, I confirmed. I'm not signing anything. I told him so. Just now. On the phone. He wasn't happy. Thank you, I said. Meaning more than gratitude. Meaning recognition. Meaning pride in a son who chose right. When choosing right cost something. We talked then about brake pads. About soup recipes. About ordinary things that anchor you. When the world feels unsteady. When family turns into business. When love requires lawyers. In the morning I signed trustee resolutions. Pen that wrote like water. Smooth. Inevitable. Natural as rivers finding the sea. Then I put on my coat. Drove to the library. Brought Nora lemon muffins. Still warm from the oven. Kindness has to be practiced. Like scales. If you want your hands to remember. The library smelled like old books. New coffee. Quiet conversations. Nora worked the night desk. 24 years old. Steady as sunrise. Kind as summer rain. She looked up when I approached. Smiled before she saw the muffins. Some people smile from the inside out. Nora was one of them. Mrs. Navarro, she said. How are you holding up? Like she cared about the answer. Like my well-being mattered. Not many people ask that way. Most ask because silence makes them uncomfortable. I'm managing, I said. Which was true. Managing wasn't the same as thriving. But it was better than surrendering. I have something to tell you, I added. About Lighthouse. About Jorge's plans. About your future if you want it. Her eyes widened. Not with greed. With curiosity. With the kind of attention that makes talking worthwhile. I told her about the scholarship fund. The apprenticeship program. The trust that would bear her name. When I was gone. When someone younger needed to carry Jorge's vision forward. She listened without interrupting. Without calculating. Without asking about money first. Or benefits. Or what was in it for her. Why me? She asked finally. Simple question. Honest confusion. Because you come, I said. Because you stay. Because you brought Jorge newspaper clippings. And ginger tea. Without announcing virtue. Without expecting rewards. She blinked fast. Eyes bright with unshed tears. I'll do it right, she promised. You'll do it kind, I corrected. Right will follow. We sat together while she processed. While I watched her understand. The weight of responsibility. The gift of purpose. The chance to matter beyond herself. At home I made lists of my own. Phone calls to return. Documents to organize. Lawyers to consult. The machinery of inheritance. Moving slowly but surely. Toward justice. I wrote 2 brief letters to my sons. Not apologies. Not sermons. Clarity instead of theater. Truth instead of comfort. To Calvin, you taught me that charm opens doors. I'm teaching you that character keeps them open. Your uncle's dream stays alive. With or without your blessing. Small bequests noted in my will. Contingent on good behavior. 2 miles you kept track when you didn't have to. You chose right when it cost you. Jorge's building will always need repairs. Good hands to fix what breaks. Yours are welcome, always. No dramatic language. No wounded mother act. Just facts. Clean as fresh sheets. Simple as morning coffee. Evening brought more legal papers. Hand delivered this time. Formal notification of challenge. Calvin's lawyers had filed. Harriet had warned me. Still felt like a slap. But slaps don't kill you. They just remind you you're alive. Still fighting. Still standing where you belong. I set the papers beside my coffee cup. Made a note to call Harriet tomorrow. Made another note to change my locks again. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Until they learn different. The house settled around me as darkness came. Familiar creaks and sighs. Sounds of wood expanding. Contracting. Breathing like old lungs. Steady and patient and strong. I wasn't afraid of Calvin's lawyers. Or his charm. Or his entitled anger. I was afraid of disappointing Jorge. Of failing his trust. Of letting weird little books disappear from the world. But Jorge had chosen well. Had prepared carefully. Had left me maps and documents. And the quiet strength that comes from knowing your purpose. Knowing your worth. Knowing when to stand. When to fight. When to win. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. The envelope arrived thick. Heavy stock paper. Law firm logo embossed like a threat wearing cologne. I read it at the same table where I'd once sorted permission slips. Field trip money. Lunch receipts. The archaeology of motherhood. Now buried under legal language. Pending action. Fiduciary breach. Request to freeze transfer. Amicable resolution preferred. They wanted a meeting to align expectations. Calvin's phrase. Calvin's strategy. Dress up demands as discussions. Make taking sound like giving. My coffee grew cold while I read. Twice. 3 times, looking for loopholes, finding none, just polite threats in paragraph form. Courtesy wrapped around brass knuckles. I called Harriet. Second ring answered. Always efficient. Never rushed. Posturing, she said when I'd read the letter aloud. They'll file something to rattle you. We'll file back. Standard procedure. Will it hold anything up? I asked. Maybe. Short delays. But the trust is solid. Title recorded. Jorge's board notes and emails sing the same tune. Everything matches the addendum. Relief tasted like pennies. Metallic. Sharp. I wasn't losing Jorge's dream. Not to legal tricks. Not to family pressure. Not to sons who saw dollar signs where he'd seen destiny. After hanging up, I went to the spare room. The one still painted soft green. From when my boys needed nightlights. When monsters lived under beds. Not in boardrooms. On the high shelf sat Jorge's composition books. 23 of them. Black and white marbled covers. He'd kept them like talismans. Even when computers were easier. Even when his hands shook. I opened them and found him on every page. Dates and lists. Little sketches of book jackets. Margin notes about authors who needed encouragement. Who deserved second chances. Who wrote stories nobody else would publish. One entire paragraph about how the press should always pay interns. Never sell the building unless the roof fell in. Keep publishing weird books. For weird people. Who needed to know they weren't alone. I copied what mattered. Made a binder with tabs. Labeled it the way I'd labeled med carts for years. Obvious. Unmissable. Calm. Evidence organized by date. By topic. By relevance to Jorge's intentions. His vision of Lighthouse continuing. Long after he was gone. Long after I was gone. That night the phone rang late. I answered because I'm old enough to know some calls don't wait. Ma, Miles said, voice tight. He served you, didn't he? He did, I confirmed. I'm not signing anything. I told him so. Just now. On the phone. He wasn't happy. Thank you, I said. Meaning more than gratitude. Meaning recognition. Meaning pride in a son who chose right. When choosing right cost something. We talked then about brake pads. About soup recipes. About ordinary things that anchor you. When the world feels unsteady. When family turns into business. When love requires lawyers. In the morning I signed trustee resolutions. Pen that wrote like water. Smooth. Inevitable. Natural as rivers finding the sea. Then I put on my coat. Drove to the library. Brought Nora lemon muffins. Still warm from the oven. Kindness has to be practiced. Like scales. If you want your hands to remember. The library smelled like old books. New coffee. Quiet conversations. Nora worked the night desk. 24 years old. Steady as sunrise. Kind as summer rain. She looked up when I approached. Smiled before she saw the muffins. Some people smile from the inside out. Nora was one of them. Mrs. Navarro, she said. How are you holding up? Like she cared about the answer. Like my well-being mattered. Not many people ask that way. Most ask because silence makes them uncomfortable. I'm managing, I said. Which was true. Managing wasn't the same as thriving. But it was better than surrendering. I have something to tell you, I added. About Lighthouse. About Jorge's plans. About your future if you want it. Her eyes widened. Not with greed. With curiosity. With the kind of attention that makes talking worthwhile. I told her about the scholarship fund. The apprenticeship program. The trust that would bear her name. When I was gone. When someone younger needed to carry Jorge's vision forward. She listened without interrupting, without calculating, without asking about money first. Or benefits. Or what was in it for her. Why me? She asked finally. Simple question. Honest confusion. Because you come, I said. Because you stay. Because you brought Jorge newspaper clippings. And ginger tea. Without announcing virtue. Without expecting rewards. She blinked fast. Eyes bright with unshed tears. I'll do it right, she promised. You'll do it kind, I corrected. Right will follow. We sat together while she processed. While I watched her understand. The weight of responsibility. The gift of purpose. The chance to matter beyond herself. At home I made lists of my own. Phone calls to return. Documents to organize. Lawyers to consult. The machinery of inheritance. Moving slowly but surely. Toward justice. I wrote 2 brief letters to my sons. Not apologies. Not sermons. Clarity instead of theater. Truth instead of comfort. To Calvin, you taught me that charm opens doors. I'm teaching you that character keeps them open. Your uncle's dream stays alive. With or without your blessing. Small bequests noted in my will. Contingent on good behavior. 2 miles you kept track when you didn't have to. You chose right when it cost you. Jorge's building will always need repairs. Good hands to fix what breaks. Yours are welcome. Always. No dramatic language. No wounded mother act. Just facts. Clean as fresh sheets. Simple as morning coffee. Evening brought more legal papers. Hand delivered this time. Formal notification of challenge. Calvin's lawyers had filed. Harriet had warned me. Still felt like a slap. But slaps don't kill you. They just remind you you're alive. Still fighting. Still standing where you belong. I set the papers beside my coffee cup. Made a note to call Harriet tomorrow. Made another note to change my locks again. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Until they learn different, the house settled around me as darkness came. Familiar creaks and sighs. Sounds of wood expanding, contracting, breathing like old lungs. Steady and patient and strong. I wasn't afraid of Calvin's lawyers. Or his charm. Or his entitled anger. I was afraid of disappointing Jorge. Of failing his trust. Of letting weird little books disappear from the world. But Jorge had chosen well. Had prepared carefully. Had left me maps and documents. And the quiet strength that comes from knowing your purpose. Knowing your worth. Knowing when to stand. When to fight. When to win. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. On Friday, Nora arrived with a metal tin. Almond cookies inside. Still warm from her grandmother's oven. She laughed softly while telling me. About the patron who tried to whisper. An entire novel. At the reference desk. She laughed the way kind people do. Too softly. As if joy might disturb someone. Might take up too much space. In a world that prizes quiet. We sat with tea. Steam softening the air between us. The red folder on the table. Now lighter by half. Less burden. More possibility. I have something for you, I said. Handing her an envelope. With her name in my careful script. Not money, I added quickly. Seeing her alarm. Not yet. Words. And instructions. She didn't open it immediately. Just touched the flap. With 2 fingers. Like touching something sacred. Something that might change everything. Is this about Lighthouse? She asked. Voice barely above whisper. Hope disguised as curiosity. It's about the Lighthouse Apprenticeship Fund, I explained. Harriet is setting it up. Legal documents. Tax preparations. The machinery of generosity, made official. When I'm gone, you'll steer it. You'll say yes to kids. With dog-eared drafts. And no one at home. Who reads? Who understands? Who believes in weird dreams? Her eyes brightened, like Jorge's press room, when he flipped the morning breaker. Light flooding dark spaces, making work possible again. You'll pay interns. Invite stubborn poets to lunch. Keep the lights on. For people who need them. Most. Why me? She asked. The question I'd expected. The one that mattered. Most. Because you come, I said simply. Because you stay. Because you brought ginger tea. Without announcing virtue. Without keeping score. Without expecting rewards. She blinked fast, eyes bright with unshed tears. I'll do it right, she promised. Voice thick with emotion. With responsibility recognized. Accepted. You'll do it kind, I corrected gently. Right will follow. Kindness first. Everything else after. That night I wrote 2 brief letters. To my sons. No apologies. No sermons. Clarity instead of theater. Truth instead of comfort. Facts instead of feelings. The letters were short. Direct. Like conversations we should have had. Years ago. Before lawyers. Before courtrooms. Before love required legal protection. Small bequests noted. Contingent on good behavior. On accepting boundaries. On understanding that love doesn't mean unlimited access to someone else's life, someone else's choices. The no contest clause sat in quiet legal ink. Black letters on white paper. Consequences spelled out. In language even Calvin could understand. Then I set bread to rise. Kneaded dough until it was smooth. Until my hands remembered the simple satisfaction of making something from nothing, of feeding people you love. The house filled with yeast smell. With warmth. With the ordinary magic of bread becoming bread. Of time passing at its proper pace. I called it a day. Early for once. Not from exhaustion. From completion. From the deep satisfaction of work finished. Promises kept. Maps followed to their proper destination. The quiet that settled was different now. Not the kind that swallows you. That makes you smaller. That whispers you don't matter. This was quiet you earn. Through standing up. Through speaking truth. Through refusing to disappear. When disappearing would be easier. It's the kind that hums. When work is finished. When kettles click off. When machines at the press. Wait patiently for morning. For new books. New stories. New reasons. To keep going. People think peace is soft. Something gentle. Something that yields. To pressure. To demands. To entitled sons. Who confuse access with love. Sometimes peace is different. Sometimes it's a steel cable. Pulled tight across a canyon. Holding exactly what it must. No more. No less. Strong enough. For the weight it carries. I was once a woman. Who made room. By stepping back. By getting smaller. By apologizing for taking up space. That someone else wanted. Now I make room. By standing where I belong. By being exactly who I am. By refusing to shrink. To accommodate someone else's comfort. Jorge called it a map. Written in legal documents. In careful plans. In trust placed. Where trust belonged. I call it something simpler. A promise kept. The bread rose while I slept. Doubled in size. Like my understanding. Of who I was. Who I'd become. Who I'd always been. Underneath the stepping back. The getting smaller. The apologizing. Morning brought fresh loaves. Golden crusts. Steam rising when I cut them. The smell filled every room, reached every corner, announced that someone still lived here, still cared, still made things worth sharing. I ate breakfast slowly, butter melting, jam spreading, simple pleasures, earned through complicated lessons, about love, about boundaries, about the difference between giving and giving up. The phone stayed quiet, no demands, no emergencies, no sons wanting things they couldn't have, shouldn't have, wouldn't get from me anymore. Outside my kitchen window, the world continued. Cars passed, dogs barked, children walked to school with backpacks and lunch money, and mothers who loved them without losing themselves in the loving. I had become that kind of mother, finally, the kind who loves from her proper place, who gives without emptying, who stays without shrinking, who protects what matters most. Lighthouse would continue under my guidance, then Norris, then someone else's, when the time came for passing forward what Jorge started, what I protected, what weird little books required to find their weird readers. The chain unbroken, the promise kept, the map followed to its proper end, which was also a beginning of something better, something stronger, something that couldn't be taken by entitled sons, or clever lawyers, or people who mistake kindness for weakness. I finished my breakfast, washed my dishes, started my day, the first day of the rest of my life, as someone who stands where she belongs. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. 3 months later, I sit at Lighthouse in Jorge's old office, his coffee mug still stained brown inside where he left it. Some things don't need changing. The Heidelberg press runs again, paper flowing through rollers, like blood through veins, like breath through lungs. The sound of words becoming real, becoming books that someone needs to read. Nora comes Tuesdays and Thursdays. After her library shift, she reads manuscripts with careful eyes, kind heart, makes notes in margins about stories that matter to people who feel forgotten. Today she brought coffee, real cream, not powder, the kind Jorge used to buy when money was tight, but kindness wasn't. Some luxuries aren't luxuries, they're necessities, disguised. We don't talk much while working. Don't need to. Understanding runs deeper than conversation. Some partnerships are built on shared silence, on knowing what matters, without explaining why. The first apprentice starts Monday. 22 years old, from nowhere, Kansas, writes poetry about farming, about soil and seasons, about staying when everyone leaves. Jorge would have loved her. Stubborn and gentle, like good editors need to be. Her name is Sarah, Sarah with calloused hands and notebook paper dreams, who wrote asking for nothing except the chance to learn, to help, to make weird books for weird readers who need them. I said yes immediately, didn't consult committees, didn't check budgets. Some decisions make themselves when you listen with the right ears, when you remember what you're here for. Calvin hasn't called in weeks. Silence is its own communication, sometimes louder than words ever were. Miles stops by Saturdays, fixes what needs fixing, says little, does much, the way good sons do, when they remember how. He brought his toolbox last weekend. Oil for hinges, washers for faucets, WD-40 for the loading dock door. That sticks in winter. We worked together, without discussing the past, the lawsuits, the choosing sides. Some healing happens in the doing, not the talking. After lunch he asked about Nora, about the apprenticeship program, about whether there'd be room for someone who understands machines better than manuscripts. I told him yes, always room for good hands and better hearts. The scholarship fund grows slowly, like Jorge's press did, like all good things do, steadily, quietly, without fanfare, or press releases, or announcements that matter more than the work itself. Last week a check arrived from an author Jorge published 5 years ago. Small press run, smaller profits, but the book found readers who needed it, who were grateful for weird stories about weird lives like theirs. The note was handwritten on library letterhead from someone named David in Oregon, who said Jorge's press had saved his life by publishing stories that felt true when nothing else did, when the world seemed built for different people, not him. I deposited the check, added David's name to the thank you list that grows longer every month. People who understand what Jorge built, what Nora protects, what weird books accomplish when they reach the right hands. Evening light slants different now through lighthouse windows, golden instead of harsh, warm instead of urgent. The quality of light changes when you're not running from anything, not hiding, not shrinking, just standing where you belong. I lock up carefully every door, every window, but not from fear, from responsibility. Some things are worth protecting, not because they're valuable by usual measures, but because they're necessary to people who need them most. The drive home takes me past Calvin's neighborhood. I don't slow down, don't look sideways at houses that cost more than Jorge's entire operation. Success measures differently when you know what you're measuring for. At home I make soup. Vegetable barley, still Jorge's favorite, though he can't taste it anymore. Some habits honor memory better than monuments do. I eat while reading manuscripts. For next month's consideration, stories about healing after betrayal, about finding family in unlikely places, about learning that love isn't possession, but protection of what matters most. One story stops me cold, about an old woman who inherits her brother's bookstore, about entitled children who want her gone, about lawyers and paperwork, and quiet victories won in courtrooms that smell like fear and furniture polish. Too close, too familiar, too much like my own story, told by someone who wasn't there, but understood anyway, the way good writers do when they listen to truth hiding in common experiences. I write comments in careful margins about character development, about pacing, about the ending that feels too neat, too resolved. Real life messier than fiction allows, sometimes, but I'll publish it if the revisions work, if the author listens to editorial guidance about making hard truths harder, about letting complexity stay complex, about resisting the urge to tie everything in pretty bows. Night brings phone calls from authors checking schedules, from printers comparing prices, from distributors placing orders. The ordinary machinery of small press publishing running smoothly because someone tends it daily. I take each call, make each note, answer each question with patience learned from years of nursing, when interruptions meant someone needed help right now, not later, not when convenient. Now, After the last call, I sit in Jorge's green room, the one where he lived. When dying, where he planned, where he trusted me, with everything that mattered to him most. His composition books still line the shelf. 23 volumes of dreams made real, through careful planning, through legal documents, through faith placed where faith belonged, in stubborn little sisters, who learned to stand when standing mattered. I open one at random, find his handwriting, still clear, still confident, still believing, in weird books, finding weird readers, who need to know they're not alone, in their weirdness, their needs, their hopes. Tomorrow I'll interview another apprentice candidate, this one from Detroit, writes about factories, about fathers who worked with their hands, about daughters who learned different ways of building things that last. Another weird writer, for weird readers, another story that needs telling, another reason Lighthouse exists in a world that prefers easy answers to hard questions. I close the notebook, turn off the light, head to bed. Tomorrow starts early at Lighthouse, where weird books wait to be born, where weird readers wait to be found, where Jorge's dream lives on in capable hands. Final